Some things you can simply explain, but some things you have to experience. Take, for example, a piece of music. I could explain to you what key and measurement it's in. I could explain to you the notes and the rhythm. I could even write it out for you. I could even explain to you the theory behind why it works to arrange it like this. But at the end of the day, you could get maybe some kind of a picture of it, but ultimately, my words would fall short. And I would fail because a piece of music is not something you explain, it's something you experience. Or a painting. I could describe to you, I could explain to you what this painting that I saw looked like, the specific colors and where the colors were and the different lines and shapes and what was in the painting and what was emphasized and what was in the foreground and the background. And I could explain to you the theory behind why it works to be that way. And you might get some sort of picture in your head of what it looked like, but ultimately my words would fall short. And I would fail because a painting is not something you explain, it's something you experience. Or take a person, my favorite person, Amanda, who we've been best friends for over 10 years. We've been married for almost 4 years, and I could try and explain to you the different shades of brown that are in her hair and where they are, and I could try and explain to you exactly what kind of blue her eyes are and how her eyelashes look when she's sleeping. I could explain to you what each different smile that she has means. I could explain to you how she is the world's worst whisperer, but the world's best smiler. I could explain to you exactly the size of her hands and how they feel when you're holding them. I could explain to you how silly and goofy she can be. I could explain to you how she just lights up when she's around little kids and she lights up their world too. And I could explain Amanda to you for hours and hours and hours. And ultimately, my words would fall short. And I would fail. Because Amanda is not something you explain. She's someone that you experience. And today, we're going to talk about Jesus. And we're going to look at some passages, and we're going to have some theology, and we're going to try to figure out who Jesus is. But let's get one thing straight up front. Ultimately, my words are going to fail. They're going to fall short. Because Jesus is more than a theology. Jesus is not something you believe. Jesus is someone that you experience. And so as we move forward here, my promise to you is I will try and fail in such a way that it moves you to a closer experience with Jesus. The first passage we're going to look at today is in John chapter 1. In John chapter 1, starting in verse 1, we're going to read a few select verses from the introduction to John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning. Everything came into being through the Word, and without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and that life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not extinguish the light. The true light that shines on all people was coming into the world. The light was in the world, and the world came into being through the light, but the world didn't recognize the light. The light came to his own people, and his own people didn't welcome him. But those who did welcome him, those who believed in his name, he authorized to become God's children, born not from blood, nor from human desire or passion, but born from God. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. So, there's a few things, a couple of things to highlight from this passage about who Jesus is. The first is that Jesus is the Word. The Word who from the beginning was with God and who was God and who made all things and who nothing was made without. And what we take from this is that Jesus is as God, Gwauwd, as God can be. Jesus is all of God's godness, the magnificence, the supremacy, the holiness, the transcendence, everything that is the most godlike. That's who Jesus is. But that's not unexpected. And that's not the craziest takeaway from this passage. The one that surprises us is at the end. That the Word became flesh and made his home among us. So even though Jesus is God, Jesus is also God when God is not being God. Jesus is God right next to you. That doesn't sound entirely godlike to me, but somehow it is. And this is the mystery and the wonder of Jesus. Well, let's look at one more passage that is going to take this even a little bit further. This one is in Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 6. Talking about Jesus, though he was in the form of God, he did not consider being equal with God something to exploit, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a slave and becoming like human beings. When he found himself in the form of a human, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Wow. That's even one more step of Jesus being God while God is not being God. Because when I think of God, I think of a lot of things. But here's some things I don't think of. I don't think of being a human. I don't think of being a slave. I don't think of being nothing. I don't think of being obedient. I don't think of being dead. But this passage says Jesus became all of those things. Jesus is the most God and the most God when God is not being God. All at the same time. And so, even though looking at these passages gives us a little bit of an insight as to who Jesus is, it leaves us probably with a lot more questions than answers. Questions like, well, how can this be? Does that even make sense? Well, is Jesus really then fully God if Jesus can be human too? Or was Jesus fully human if Jesus is still God? Or how do those things work? Did God die? How can this be? All these questions and more, questions that people have asked and talked about since the beginning of Christianity. And people have come up with some pretty good answers. And I could stand up here and talk to you about the answers that I like to all those questions. And we could talk theology all day. And I would love it. And you would probably hate it after like 6 hours. And I would just be getting started. And ultimately, though, there is one answer that I think we should look at. And it's Jesus' answer. And I think his answer to these questions is a good one. And so we're going to look at one more passage today, and we're going to go back to John chapter 1, but a little further on in the passage, starting in verse 35. The next day, John the Baptist, was standing again with two of his disciples. And when he saw Jesus walking along, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." The two disciples heard what he said, and they followed Jesus. When Jesus turned and saw them following, he asked, "What are you looking for?" They said, "Rabbi," which is translated teacher, "where are you staying?" He replied, "Come and see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they remained with him that day. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the two disciples who heard what John had said and followed Jesus was named Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which is translated Christ. And so he led him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. The next day, Jesus wanted to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Now Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, Joseph's son from Nazareth." And Nathanael responded, "Can anything good be from Nazareth?" And Philip said, "Come and see." Jesus' answer, "Come and see," is to me the core of who Jesus is. Jesus is walking and he notices some people following him, and he says, "What are you looking for?" And they said, "Where are you staying?" And he didn't say, "Oh, on the corner of Fig and Camel, second house on the right, just can't miss it." He said, "Come and see." And so they went, and they spent the day with him. Jesus' answer is not one that just gives some information. It's one that invites you to experience him. And that, to me, is the core of who Jesus is. Jesus is the one who draws you in to fuller experience and fuller participation with God. So all of these questions that we have, all of these theologies that we have, all of these things that we want to know, it can be okay to come up with answers to those things, but at the end of the day, when we're trying to describe Jesus, our words are going to fall short. And our descriptions are going to fail. And the only thing that brings the understanding is an experience of Jesus. So, to you with the questions, to all of us with the questions of how Jesus, or who Jesus, or why Jesus, or when or where Jesus, Jesus looks at us and says, "Come and see. Come and experience me. Spend a day soaking in my words. Spend some time in prayer. Go sit out in nature for a little bit. Or spend some time among my people and come and see." Because, people, our job is to have that same answer. Do you see what happened in the story? When Philip goes and talks to Nathanael, and Philip says, "We've experienced something. We found Jesus." Nathanael says, "Really?" Philip says, "Come and see." And Nathanael goes with him. Our job is to fail at explaining Jesus in such a way that it draws people to experience him for themselves. Our job is to fail at explaining Jesus to ourselves in such a way that it helps us experience Jesus for ourselves. And so what that looks like, I could try and explain to you for a long time. I could explain to you my own experience in my life with Jesus for hours and hours, and it'd be a great day. And then I could listen to you explain to me your experience with Jesus. And that's important because my experience and your experience are probably unique. And we could help each other figure out how to better experience Jesus. And so that's important and helpful and meaningless if it ends with explanation, and life-changing if it ends with experience. So, wherever you are with Jesus, if this is the first time you've heard about any of this and you're just curious, if you are kind of new and you feel like you might be ready, if you've been doing this your whole life and you've still just believed about Jesus and never experienced him, or if you experience Jesus all the time and you need to learn how to say this to other people, then my hope and my prayer for you is the same one that Jesus has, that you will come and see.
He gets done and I have to stop and turn my mic on. I'm never ready for him to finish. I hope everyone has filled out their, I think it was a green card this week. And if you have, please pass those towards the center of the room. And I think I need a volunteer. I don't see anybody running back there to grab the basket. So there's Mike's picking up some. Somebody, oh, hey, got it. We got it taken care of. While we're singing our last song, some of the leaders of this church will be standing at the back of the auditorium. And if you have been experiencing Jesus, or if you want to experience Jesus and want to share that or want to have some help with that, go back and allow the leaders to assist you in that. Or maybe you've just been experiencing life and it hasn't been Jesus and you need some help. Again, we'll have some of our leaders at the back of the room while we sing this song. Let's all stand up and sing this. Shine, Jesus, shine.
Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the darkness shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine.